All right. Hi, my name is Sonia Farmer, and I'm excited to talk to you all today about Poinciana Paper Press, a small press dedicated to empowering the diversity of narratives in Caribbean art and literature. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, history, and context, and then take a look at my plans to establish a Center for Book Arts here in the region that can support publishing projects and other programming opportunities in order to support its mission to advance cultural ownership and voice from within the region. So in 2009, I made two limited edition chapbooks for Bahamian writers, and I published them under a press, Poinciana Paper Press. Having just completed my BFA in writing at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, I had been recently exposed to small presses through the chapbook form. Introduced to me by my friend and colleague Jen Hyde, who started Small Anchor Press, the chapbooks I encountered combined digital printing, letterpress printing, and hand binding into limited editions that were distributed at poetry readings, book festivals, independent bookstores, or through trade with other small presses for their chapbooks. While this alternative form of publishing spoke to my desire to make books the way I thought they should live in the world, using some handmade aesthetic in limited quantities, small presses appeal to me because they play a vital role in building and sustaining cultural communities. The two writers I first published then were from my own literary community in the Bahamas, even though I was living in New York City at the time. One writer was emerging and one writer was established, but both were in need of a publisher. I loved making books, and I decided to start my own press. Small presses position themselves as collaborators with their authors, bringing them into the bookmaking process and determining together how they would shape contemporary literature through publishing. So that's what I did. I organized bookbinding parties where the authors and other interested folks could come together and connect, share, and build. I prepped my materials abroad where I lived, first in New York City, and then in London, and then I flew home and made books with my community in the Bahamas. Here are a few shots of that over the years. I really have to shout out The Hub, a gallery and community space in downtown Nassau founded by Margot Bethel, as well as Dungalik Studios, founded by Jackson and Pam Burnside, for hosting these events, as well as my early launches. I really appreciated that they made space for my press. Here you can see Margot Bethel herself at the top left, and also Orchid Burnside at the bottom left, who they both contributed tremendously to my press projects in those early years, and I'm really grateful for their continuing support. As a volunteer of small presses, I witnessed support for writers and artists through fundraising, publishing prizes, fair royalties, and support for experimental projects, all for often marginalized voices. Most importantly, unlike the gatekeeper industry of mainstream publishing, I felt welcome in small presses as spaces of community. Here, one could volunteer and learn, take a class, network, find collaborators, and attend literary and creative events. When I started Poinciana Paper Press, I too wanted to take on projects using this collaborative approach that contributed to building my immediate literary and artistic communities in Nassau, the Bahamas, and by that extension contributed to building Caribbean and their diasporic literary and artistic communities as well, specifically from within this geographical space. Why? Well, to contribute to a growing, flourishing creative ecosystem in the Caribbean, I'm compelled to physically position my publishing work within the Bahamas rather than outside of the Caribbean, because I think it's vital to our self-determination. I'm particularly excited to align the work that I make as a writer and publisher with this current regional pushback against the single Caribbean story and space. Starting with Columbus and enduring to this day through the all-inclusive resorts in the tourism industry, as well as the media, Caribbean identity has been built to sustain and privilege the voice of the visitor as protagonist in places occupied by other bodies and silent stories. But we live here too. I identify and position my creative practice in direct opposition to this privileging, and I consider Poinciana Paper Press an extension of my creative practice. As a writer, I'm interested in using my writing as a tool for disrupting and investigating existing narratives as a way to question their inherent power structures and expose alternative, marginalized, and/or hidden voices, interpretations, and experiences. As an artist, I use handmade books, papermaking, letterpress printing, and digital projects to build platforms and homes for these narratives. And as a publisher of a small independent press, I work with writers and artists using multiple forms of publishing to advance the diversity of narratives in Caribbean literature. I think that we need to see ourselves take this action rather than outside forces. That's one of the reasons I publish my own work, besides having total control over the design and execution of my work. And I use my self-publishing experiences to create a publishing model for my press for others. So when I first relocated back to Nassau after my time in Brooklyn around 2010, I embarked on a personal research project to investigate how Bahamians published their work. My primary motivation for this research was to help me think about how my small press could serve the community. What I found out is that the Bahamas has a special history of alternative publishing. Scores of authors who, finding few outlets or platforms for their books, had made up a press name, purchased an ISBN or not, and proceeded to publish their books using a local offset printer, and then later print-on-demand services and digital platforms. Even the most well-known and beloved books in Bahamian literary history are included in this practice. So Bahamian writers have for decades been self-publishing with small presses as acts of survival from a geographical place where our bodies are constantly threatened with erasure. But what if we made books that moved publishing from the realm of survival into the realm of flourishing, so that they became an empowering, creative, and fulfilling practice that can transform the way we see ourselves and the way our country and the world sees us? As writers, I think we have been conditioned to think about publishing as something someone else does for us or something we do for ourselves, but I'd like to use Poinciana Paper Press to explore how publishing can be done with a community rather than for a community, something that involves positioning myself within the space and embracing multiple forms of storytelling to help us own our narratives. Okay, great. Now to find the equipment and the space to support this. I figured there must be some letterpress equipment on the island somewhere. And for those of you who heard my last presentation during the 2018 AFA conference, this might sound a little familiar. I ended up finding out about a letterpress shop that had closed its doors in 2001 called the Craftsman Press. Founded by Mr. Oscar Johnson Sr. and his wife Sylvia in 1954, this thriving social and commercial printing establishment was the leading service provider for printing in Nassau for many decades. With the family's kind agreement, I moved a Chandler and Price press, along with several typecases and miscellaneous printing equipment, into my studio space, which was a little kind of repurposed garage in a corporate building owned by my parents. And I have to give a super big shout out to my parents who are pictured here, moving a type bank in only one of many instances of moving letterpress equipment with me and for me. It's through their physical, emotional, and financial support that I am even able to take on this endeavor. I also wanted to show you guys this really peak Caribbean shot of the Chandler and Price hovering above the banana trees being moved by a crane. That's exactly it. So for the next 5 years or so, while I worked full-time jobs and freelance jobs, I made books and projects, deepened my relationship with the local and regional literary and arts communities, traveled and learned as much as I could. Besides the Craftsman Press equipment, I hunted for used letterpress, papermaking, and binding equipment abroad. I made work when I could in my little studio, and I collaborated with local and regional writers and artists, as well as provided workshops and joined initiatives to showcase our creative community. This is just a brief overview of activity during this time. I published books and catalogs in collaboration with other institutions, such as the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. You can see a shot of that catalog for Kingdom Come, the exhibition Kingdom Come at the center bottom. That was designed by Denise Hepburn, but I helped to design the format. Another institution I collaborated with was the Current Art Gallery at Bahamas, which is a resort, had a couple of galleries at this resort. I worked there, and then I pitched that we should make our own handmade limited edition catalogs, and they went for it. So we made a couple of those catalogs. under Current Press, which we will come back to later. I also made books in collaboration with events, such as here at the bottom left. I wonder if I said left earlier. Sorry if I did. At the bottom left, this was an exhibition at the Hub, which I mentioned earlier, as part of the Transforming Spaces Island-wide Art Tour in 2012. This is an annual tour that we do, visiting visiting galleries across the island of Nassau. I was also in the planning committee for that, but here I got to mount a piece of 30 folks who were invited to create an exquisite corpse poem, and then a visual for their line that I then strung together on the wall, and then also in a book form. And this piece up here, all of these D's together in the top left corner, that's a book cover in progress for a little anthology that I made for my friend Perry Redwood for his event, the Small Art Auction House, which was to help raise funds for his tuition to study abroad. I wasn't sure what kind of subject to do for this anthology, but he said, well, all auctions happen because of death, debt, and divorce. And so I said, that's the anthology. I invited, I think about 7 writers across the Caribbean to contribute 6-word stories about death, debt, and divorce. It was a hit. It was a hit. I also taught workshops. Next to that image, you can see the result of a bookbinding workshop at Poinciana Paper Press. You know it's at my press because the wall is bright pink. Why not? And also a workshop here at Pop-Up Studios next to that with a bunch of participants. I'm really grateful to Pop-Up Studios for hosting a couple of my workshops over this period of time. I also made a little chapbook here at the bottom right corner. Those are Orchid's hands, by the way, and here she is again holding some Christmas cards we made together. We collaborated on some Christmas and Valentine's Day cards. She helped me print the covers for this chapbook that I also made, which is, this contains some poems that I, along with Obadiah Michael Smith, wrote together in response for an exhibition again at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, which was called Swan Song of the Flamingo by Bahamian artist Keyshawn Monroe. He invited us to contribute some poems to that sort of multimedia exhibition. And then I said, I'll also make a chapbook. Why not? And Orchid and I also collaborated on another project that we called Illiterati, which came out of a internal joke, but then became an actual thing that we did. And we hosted a story slam, the Literary Story Slam, for about a year. And you can see an artist named Lawrence here in the Bahamas who is sharing his story, Lawrence Burns, one of his epic travel tales, I'm sure he shared a few times. So this is just a little snapshot of what I got up to in that time. And it was a really fun time. So then a big change, right? The University of Iowa Center for the Book accepted me into their graduate program. And I spent 3 absolutely life-changing years in Iowa City, clarifying my creative practice, honing my skills, and expanding my thinking around how my press could better serve its community. My thesis, Poinciana Paper Press, a publishing model for the Caribbean, explored what this could look like through a publishing model made with writers, artists, cultural spaces, and the Bahamian community. So these are the 4 projects that I ended up producing for my thesis. The first one here at the top right is called The Best Estimation in the World. This is a model for full-length book design and multi-format distribution. So I turned this poetry collection of mine into a book with a digitally printed interior and letterpress printed covers. That was one format, and that's how I would prefer to make my books. I also made, though, a print-on-demand format that is distributed on Amazon. It's currently on there if you'd like to order it. For those who can't pay the exorbitant shipping fees from the Caribbean, and we will get into that discussion later, but I'm talking like it's at least $20 if we use our mailing service, which was down during the pandemic, and by courier it's $80. So, or you can work with the devil of Amazon and order my book. I also made a downloadable PDF of it that was another option for people who maybe couldn't even get anything shipped to them in a timely manner or at all. So that was one component. The other component is current books, and this is down here at the bottom left. I'm revisiting current books. I mentioned them just in the slide before. When I worked at The Current, which is a arts gallery at a local tourism resort called Bahamas. They have some artists in residence, and at one point I was also a writer in residence with another writer, Yasmin Glinton, and we finished our residency alongside a couple of visual artists. There was a show upcoming, and we thought we would really like something to show for ourselves, you know, as writers alongside the visual works that are being put up on the wall. So I said, well, we could just make chapbooks of our work. And the head of The Current, Bahamas, the creative arts director at Bahamas, John Cox, he worked with me to conceptualize current books, sort of revive it from my time when I was there, when I made a couple of catalogs under that imprint. So we ended up making a few chapbooks for that. And this was another way that I really want Poinciana Paper Press to support starting other small presses that can then sustain themselves. The third model that I made is at the top left here, which is the red thread cycle. And this is a model for artist book projects and artistic collaboration. This is made with Trinidadian writer Shivani Ramlachan, who entrusted me to make 7 small books out of her 7-part poem, The Red Thread Cycle, which catalogs sexual violence in the Caribbean. These are from her collection, Everybody Knows I Am a Haunting, which was published by Poinciana Press in 2017. And I think that this was also an example of how Poinciana Paper Press can engage with already published works in the canon to rethink or celebrate them. I'm really, really appreciative that Shivani as well as Poinciana Press agreed to this project because it turned out really beautifully. The last project, just did my slides, just got a new desktop, so I'm just getting used to how the mouse works. The final project that I did, or final publishing model, it's a really, really loose idea of publishing, is at the bottom right here, and that's the Craftsman Press Archive. And this is like a model for ongoing digital publishing projects and community collaboration. Again, if you were present during my 2018 talk, at the 2018 AFA conference, this might sound a little bit familiar, but these are some vintage cuts taken from the Craftsman Press type collection, prompting, and these cuts prompt like gathering oral histories from Bahamians about these long forgotten downtown spaces, because a lot of these spaces or companies or institutions no longer exist. So not necessarily a book form at all, but thinking about expanding the definition of publishing to include other forms. And this is potentially one of them. So these projects present a range of materials, forms, and outreach, which can have multiple intersections to meet the needs of each individual project that Poinciana Paper Press produces. And this is only the publishing arm of the press. I've also spent a lot of time thinking about like the programming and educational arms of the press and outreach and all of these other things that I will get to shortly. So with that, Poinciana Paper Press came back home again in 2019 to see that it could facilitate a rich community space, kind of like a Center for Book Arts, where artists and writers could collaborate on multiple projects and opportunities, take classes, rent studio time, find Bahamian and Caribbean-made books and stationery, undergo research, and maybe even find grants or other support. Everyone knows what the last 2 years were like. So after facing a studio space transition, real estate woes, a major energy crisis, a major hurricane, and a global pandemic, things haven't exactly gone to plan. But there have been some small successes through it all. We've been able to inherit some more presses locally, this time a couple of platen presses and type from the Greek Orthodox Church, as well as a hydraulic etching press from the artist Sue Katz-Lightbourne, which will allow us to expand our printmaking programming in the studio, which I'm really excited about. I really have to shout out Tevin Williams and Matthew Ramming, who you will see in the bottom left-hand corner moving the 2 presses. They have been the best, most careful and up for it press movers I've ever worked with. I also really need to thank my partner Manfred for pitching in over these years. He's also there with the tattooed arm in the picture. He also ended up building me a little studio space, which you see me working on there, painting some shelves. And that was actually very useful during the lockdowns of the past couple of years. So not exactly what I envisioned, but things are still happening. And I am excited to say that at this point, we have put down a deposit on a really excellent spot, and that by the end of next year, all of the equipment and plans I've been drafting can come together in what I hope will be a thriving space. I can't show you a picture of the space yet, but I can tell you that it will include a letterpress studio with about half a dozen presses in a variety of type, a dark room for processing plates, as well as screens, a digital support room, a recording booth, a retail shop, a paper mill with a supporting garden and outdoor space, a library and archives, and a small gallery showcase area. These will make up what I hope will be a thriving space to support publishing initiatives, research, workshops, internships, outreach, studio rentals, grants, and residency. Ambitious, but I'm up for it. And those of you who know me know that I am up for it. And it's probably not surprising. Go big or go home. Just kidding, I'm already home. Only option left is to go big. So here's a look at our vision and mission. And I'm also going to share some of our core values going forward, which I hope will provide the right kind of scaffolding for Poinciana Paper Press to make an impact. So I mentioned before the Craftsman Press Archive, which is one of the ways that I hope Poinciana Paper Press can honor and make visible the historical contributions of the presses in our care, because now we have multiple presses in our care from multiple places, even outside of the Bahamas. And I think it's important for us to keep these memories alive through operation and through investigation. I envision Poinciana Paper Press to be an inclusive space, a community tool for a socially engaged and empowering art practice that builds a critical cultural dialogue with our community, environment, and resources. For sure, I foresee the press as a force in the creative ecology of the Caribbean, a hub, first of all, for writers where we don't really have one, to workshop our writing, find free resources in the library, encourage each other to submit and publish our own work, and to celebrate our work with readings and fellowship. I also foresee the press as a critical driver of the growth of book arts in the country and the region, as it will provide a community print shop, bindery, and paper mill for use via residencies, as well as studio rentals, and a physical and digital platform for selling and distributing these works. The presence of both artists and writers in the space, as well as folks from many other backgrounds, will facilitate a rich and exciting collaboration through the site of the book, as well as support a flourishing of small presses and miscellaneous publications and projects via guidance and resources for self-publishing. Supporting that is the educational component of Poinciana Paper Press. Besides offering basic and specialized workshops utilizing the facilities and collections, we are forging a partnership with the local university to support an expansion of their academic courses to encompass some more book arts courses. This would also facilitate an internship program for students and emerging artists and writers who want to know more about the field. Lastly, our library and digital support center will be dedicated to collecting, digitizing, and sharing research on small presses in the Caribbean and the diaspora, as well as other special projects. So over the past decade, I've had to introduce a great amount of flexibility and self-reflection in order to adjust my thinking around how Poinciana Paper Press functions within the Bahamas, a place with low literacy rates, little emphasis on and pride in a national literature, and a local dialect that is not considered proper English in the written realm, which creates a disconnect for everyday lived experiences here. And yet we also have a rich history of oral culture. And this is where storytelling is a critical pastime and an everyday tool for human connection and community building. So this has expanded my thinking about publishing beyond the format of the book. After all, publishing is just formally sharing your work with an audience. So in addition to facilitating opportunities for making and interacting with books, Poinciana Paper Press will also support performance-based programming, such as spoken word events and story slam events. This is a shot of one of our final story slam events before we went into lockdown due to the pandemic. But we're hoping to keep it going when it is safe enough to do so. The recording studio will also support recorded formats of books, podcasts, and gathering oral histories for various archival and research projects supported by our library, as well as other experimental audio projects. I'm really excited about the expansion in this direction because I think that voice is really important in what we do. Another way I've really had to check myself is reconciling the work that I do in making books within a country that doesn't even really engage with books or reading. And that's driven by many factors, one of them being lack of basic literacy. It's also a framework of, oppressive literary standards, but, okay. So I plan to facilitate partnerships with local literacy programs to see how the press can support their initiatives with youth, prison, and migrant populations. Increasingly, this is becoming more and more important to me. I still have a lot of learning to do in this area, but I hope that the hands-on and empowering element of making books or physically handling type can nurture positive experiences with reading and writing. Slides are freaking out again. Here we go. I've also had to reconcile my foreign education with my homegrown realities. Basically, I've had to paradoxically do a lot of unlearning and the learning process while moving back home, decentering my earlier rigid ideas on form and materiality, which of course was reinforced in my training abroad around the world. And that's not placing any blame on a place or an institution. It's just a result of material availability and cultural tradition in the spaces where I went. And these tended to be Western, and it imparted a kind of hierarchy of materiality and process in my learning and understanding, as well as through the ease of availability of these materials, which are definitely not available here. So the Bahamas is a scattered archipelago of islands. We pay exorbitant fees to send items and to receive items. So mailing one of my artist books costs between $50 to $180 American dollars, depending on the destination, as well as it takes there's 45% duty on bringing in art supplies. So it's 45% duty plus other shipping sort of duties and fees that I don't quite understand. And then also like a 12.5 value added tax onto that. So by the time a material arrives that I might need, it's basically doubled in cost. And so then that drives up my cost of my products and my sales. So as a result, I've had to rethink how to work with what we have available. For some materials, there are a few workarounds. For others, like books, it means that whereas before I was working with a digital printer abroad to perfect bind my books, which would involve shipping a bunch of heavy items back and forth, I'll have to take on the entire process of printing and binding myself and explore also digital book distribution and digital born projects to provide more accessible and affordable distribution options. In other areas, though, like in handmade paper, there are many exciting possibilities to explore based on our available fiber, like partnerships with pineapple and banana farms, or even repurposing discarded materials like bedding from hotels. That would be kind of interesting. So even though import and export will remain a point of contention for me, likely forever, and I'm still doing a lot of learning about that, I'm trying my best to find an opportunity in the struggle and to remember that the shift in perspective facilitates more sustainable practice. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my practice and plans with you. If any of you ever find yourselves making a stop in Nassau, the Bahamas, please reach out. I might have my space ready and we can come and we can make something together. Thank you so much.